Now we're delighted to have Obianuju Ekeocha from Culture of Life Africa join us on the Rally for Life today. Hi Uju.
Hi Neve, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be part of the rally this year. This is amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, it's amazing to have you. And a lot of people will know you, Uju, after you became a viral sensation for the powerful speech you made at the United Nations, where you talked about the abortion lobby enforcing its own ideology on the women of Africa. Can you tell us some more about that?
Yeah, so that was what a lot of people have now called ideological neocolonialism. And it's this phenomenon whereby Western countries that are wealthier, Western entities, sometimes Western private foundations, in their relationship with African countries, they are giving humanitarian aid, which is meant to be good and altruistic. But then while they are within this relationship, donor-recipient relationship, they're pushing their own ideas and their own ideologies towards these poorer countries, towards these developing countries. And that's what we've seen a lot of across the African continent, where a country comes and they say they're giving money or funding for healthcare, and then they're still then telling us to legalize abortion and things like that. So that's ideological neocolonialism. And I've talked about it in many places, including the UN, as you alluded to.
So I think that's what you described, Uju, as the strings that are attached to the aid or to the help that Africa gets from the West and from European countries. And you've said before that what African women actually want is better maternal health care instead of abortion.
Yeah, so imagine, Neve, that, maternal health care has become a real problem for us in many African countries. It's a weak point within African healthcare systems. Our maternal death rate is so high. It's the highest in the world. You find a lot of the African countries having this problem that just will not go away. So it's been a weak spot and a vulnerability for African countries. And because Western donors know that, when they approach us and they are trying to advise us on maternal health care and even donate money and things in order to help alleviate the problem, it's unfortunate to find within that particular kind of relationship Western countries that should know better telling us that if we legalize abortion or if we made abortion easily accessible, that our maternal health care will be better. That's absolutely a horrible lie. But we found Western countries using this as a proper strategy now because it's a weak point for African countries. So they're using it especially in countries where they are so culturally opposed to abortion. They are trying to force abortion in as a good in healthcare. But what we want is maternal healthcare. We want safe delivery, not the so-called safe abortion.
Yeah, and you've talked about how there are racist undertones. You feel that sometimes racist undertones in how aid is offered to African countries?
Well, by all means, if you look at the way they roll out their plans, if you see the countries that they are targeting is mostly the sub-Saharan African countries. And the sub-Saharan African countries, for those who don't know, are the 45 or 46 countries that are below the Northern African region. So the Black Africans, in other words, they are targeting these countries. They are pushing their ideas whenever they're picking on programs. When they offer other people education, for example, they offer us the so-called sexual and reproductive health and rights in countries where people can't even find clean drinking water, or food for their families or education for their children. So yes, I believe that this is a kind of racism in a way. I call it philanthropic racism, where they are targeting particularly Black African countries for the worst of the projects, for the most ideological of the projects, and they are militant about it because they're holding our African leaders almost at ransom. If only those leaders who are cooperating with them are getting the money, and in that cooperation you have a lot of ideological maneuvers, and it's coming from Western players.
I think you can see very often in some of the unspoken ideology that seems to be saying that instead of making better lives for Africans, we need fewer Africans. And I think that's something that should concern people, the kind of ideology that's driving that. A lot of our viewers here today are going to be surprised to learn that Irish aid, money from Irish taxpayers, is now funding this kind of ideological colonisation. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it's quite unfortunate actually, because initially, or for many, many years, a lot of African countries have respected Ireland in the sense that Ireland is one of the Western countries that decided they were not going to fund abortions in African countries. You had a policy in your books, in your foreign policy, to never fund abortion in developing countries. But once abortion was legalized in Ireland, within 60 days, the Irish government launched a policy paper that had then officially changed the Irish position and lifted the ban, or they were going to lift this ban to not fund abortions overseas. Obviously, Ireland then wanted to step in and become a major key player in bringing abortion to developing countries. And that's one of the most unfortunate things. So Ireland now is open to funding abortions overseas, and they are doing it through their various funding streams. But also, in addition to that, something quite disturbing happened during a UN event that was held in Kenya in November of 2009, where Ireland had their own delegations at this International Conference on Population and Development, the ICPD. And one of the key people who were sent by Ireland to this event was Senator Noon, who I think now is no longer a senator, but at the time, she had a very critical position in Ireland, being a senator, but also being part of the delegation that was sent to Nairobi. And while she was at this event, it was unbelievable to hear her giving a speech at this major event about how Ireland had a success story. And what she was describing as a success story was how the Irish brought an end through referendum to the 8th Amendment. Mind you, she's sitting in an African country. Mind you, most of the African countries do not have legal abortion, and they don't want legal abortion. But Senator Noon was talking about legalizing abortion as a success story, trying to advise African countries. And I find this as the height of Western arrogance. This is only a Western person can come to an African country and talk about something which a lot of Africans are diametrically opposed to, as if it's a success story. So we've had the Irish not only funding abortion, but also really pushing the ideology, using their own platforms. And I want to appeal to the Irish people now, people who are paying taxes, people who are sponsoring Irish Aid, which is your agency that deals with aid and funding in developing countries, to please ensure that Ireland does not become an exporter of abortion, because some of the Western countries, we've seen that coming from some of the Western countries, that Ireland doesn't join the league of Western neocolonialists who are coming to Africa to push for a particular ideology which the Africans are opposed to. Ireland, in fact, is a country that many African countries identify with, because the Irish have had an unbelievable history of so much pain and oppression. So how is it now that Ireland wants to be the oppressor in pushing something like a horrible ideology like abortion on African countries? So it's an appeal, and Africans don't want to see the Irish coming to push something as horrible as the killing of unborn babies in our countries.
That's such an important point, and I think people who are listening today, get onto your politicians, tell them that African women do not want Western ideology bringing abortion and forcing it on African countries. Just finally, Uju, right now, right across the world, we're seeing a big move to tear down statues, especially of people who are meant to have had a racist or an imperialist past. And of course, two of the founders of the biggest abortion providers in the world, Margaret Sanger in relation to Planned Parenthood and Mary Stopes in relation to the Mary Stopes Foundation, were horrible racists. Should we start with tearing down their monuments and the statues to them?
Actually, these two women, from the early 20th century are key people. Not only were they racists, they were also eugenicists. And of course, as anybody who studies the eugenics movement of the early 20th century would see that they were against people with, disabilities, but also just against Black people. So, Mary Stopes and Margaret Sanger, two key women who pushed this idea and ideology, they combine this very toxic, two toxic things, which are racism and eugenics, into a particular ideology that they infused into these two massive organizations that they left to the world. These are two poisonous legacies, and I call them poisonous because they really are. This is Planned Parenthood and Marie Stopes International. We find them in Western countries. We see everything that they are doing now. They have become major organizations in whatever countries that they exist in. But we also have seen them in Africa. I have worked in many African countries, and there are many countries where you see International Planned Parenthood Federation and their agencies, and we've seen many African countries where you have Marie Stopes International functioning. Mind you, organizations that have had racist roots, these are racist legacies, eugenic legacies. Of course, this should be the first organizations and legacies we should uproot and completely delete, if possible, because they have done horrible work for in their history, but they continue also to do it. It's not as if they have had any kind of major change. These are organizations that are pushing their ideas. They are going to black and ethnic minority neighborhoods. They are aborting black babies in various countries at a much higher rate. And mind you, I'm against abortion, whether it's a black baby or white baby, it doesn't even matter to me, but you still find, if you study the data, that they are attacking minority groups more than any other groups. When you come to African countries as well, we find that it is Marie Stopes International, the organization, and International Planned Parenthood Federation are two major voices and funders of all the movements in the different African countries that are trying to legalize abortion in black African countries. So obviously these organizations have very deep-rooted problems. They do have very poisonous past and toxic past in the toxic ideologies of their founders. And I think now that we are visiting the past, we should completely uproot this particular, these two ideologies and legacies that are infused in these two organizations left behind by two horrible racists in history, Marie Stopes and Margaret Sanger.
I couldn't agree with you more. Uju, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me.